On this episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show, we talk about how you can work with athletes even if you don't know a ton about their specific sport.
The Ask Mike Reinold Show. Helping people feel better, move better, and perform better.
Before we get to the podcast, I wanted to make sure you knew about my free online course on the Introduction to Performance Therapy and Training. If you want to learn how to get started optimizing and enhancing performance, this is the course for you. Head to mikereinold.com/performance to sign up today. Welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show. We're up at Champion PT and Performance up in Boston, Massachusetts. Lenny Macrina, Dan Pope, Mike Scaduto here, answering all your physical therapy, fitness, sports, performance, etc. questions. Dave Tilley, on vacation? Is he officially on vacation?
He's a staycation.
He's a staycation.
Staycation.
Dave Tilley not joining us, for this batch of podcasts.
Miss you, Dave.
We miss him already. Let's see if he picks up on this. But more importantly, I think Dave's more replaced by our exceptional new student, right? Like, Len, who's our student today?
We have a new student today. His name is Trey Martin.
Wait, we already did the new student. This is the second
This is
episode.
Trey has been with us for a long time.
You guys remember Trey from last week?
We had a great week together, Trey, and I learned a lot about Trey. Did you know about Trey from East Tennessee State University? Trey played Division I baseball. He was All-American first baseman for Tennessee, and he hit for the cycle in his senior year. I just made that up, so don't know anything about it.
I was like, I'm surprised by that.
I was shocked. I didn't know that either.
I just made that up. I don't know. I just met Trey, so we love you, Trey.
We're working on that.
I
love you too,
yeah.
Lenny, yeah.
Trey, what do we have for a great question today?
So our great question is, Dear Champion PT crew, a lot of PT students have aspirations of working with athletes. What advice do you have for new grads working with athletes who play sports a PT knows very little about? If you've ever been in this situation, how do you ensure confidence in the patient and buy-in?
That's a really good question. I agree. Yeah, a lot of people get into physical therapy because they want to get into sports, athletics, outpatient, ortho, those types of things. I agree with that. Sports in general, though, I think there's a certain percentage of physical therapists that's why they probably went to school for PT. I know I was part of that, right? Now, I had a sport that I really liked, so I kind of tried to get good at one particular sport, and I know a lot of people do that. But that's a great question. What's his name? What's the name?
It just says Champion PT crew, no name.
Oh, I screwed up. We didn't put the name on it. I apologize if that was you. You can tweet at us and make fun of us. I apologize. What do you do? Because I feel like a lot of students have asked this lately. I don't know if you've picked up on this, but what do you do when they're like, hey, I don't understand football, or I don't understand soccer, and I'm going to this clinic and a lot of patients there are football players because they're in with this coach or they're in with this school or something like that. Like, how do I work with that athlete? And I actually think it was a really great question. We're lucky because we're all of us work with sports, and I think we work with a variety of sports. But I mean, I've worked with a ton of NFL players, and I don't know football. I've worked a ton of NBA.
Definitely weren't, but you might have been a point guard.
I remember clearly in 6th grade figuring out that basketball wasn't my thing, right? I remember that, there's ways to do it. So who wants to start this off? You want to start, Len?
I'll start off because we do a lot of baseball here, obviously, and that's the sport I grew up playing. But we treat a lot of lacrosse, and I've never played lacrosse. A lot of swimming, a lot of rowing, a lot of soccer, football, so swimming. You know what I mean? So a lot of sports that are. There's a very big commonality, especially if you're dealing with a quarterback for football or higher level sports, CrossFit. They all, if they're good at their sport, they're typically hypermobile. So you kind of put them all under that envelope of treatments, right? And that's your thought process is they need to be really strong for their sport. And then you got to figure out, whether or not I have to tweet somebody or talk to these guys about a sport or do some research on the web, whether it's PubMed or not, and figure out the different mechanics of the sport and maybe some studies that show outcomes for that sport or the mechanics of that sport, and really show that person that you care about their situation and you're going to do that extra research to help them and to better understand what they're trying to get back to. I don't know anything about crew. You know, I've treated a lot of crew people here that,
What about
that
swimming?
row. I've done swimming too, and what other sports are on the list? But honestly, those sports, I've never done that. You know what I mean? So, but I think the people that I treat buy in that I understand their shoulder injury, I understand the nature of how the injury probably happened, and then I get to get them back to their sport, and I will do my best to figure out what that means. You know what I mean? You're coaching that person along the whole time. You letting them know that you're doing research and you're trying to self-educate yourself, and you're getting in their head. You want to empower the client to give you that information as well, because they want to share what they're going to be going through, and they want to share the different aspects of the sport, and you want to hear it from them too, because then now they are directly involved in their care. So
That was good, right? Mike, you're bad at most sports. How do you?
Extremely average at all sports, actually. I think if you're sitting down with a patient for the first time and it's a sport that you're totally unfamiliar with, you really have to give a really good and thorough, subjective interview, basically. So there's ways to ask questions that makes you not necessarily, or it doesn't make it seem like you don't know what you're talking about, but you can get key pieces of information from that person about their sport. Right? They probably know their sport a lot better than you do. So you can ask them what the training looks like, how many days a week, how many hours, what type of things do you have to do, what are you doing for strength training, how much strength training are you doing as training for your sport. All that stuff you can kind of figure out and get a picture of that athlete's profile without knowing the exact biomechanics of the sport, and then you can kind of pick up on what do they need to be able to do for their sport. Is it a field-based sport? They need to be able to run, cut, jump. Is it golf where they need to be a rotational athlete? And you can kind of put people into certain categories almost a little bit and come up with a needs list for them. And then taking their injury into account, you can kind of apply that to that person.
Yeah, it sounds like there's, the biggest thing to think of when you take a huge step back is that athletes are athletes, and that's probably the first thing to consider. They all have the same probably goals, desires, fears, right? Letting down their team, being injured, all these things like that. There are a lot of commonalities between athletes in general. So just being able to talk or be able to connect with an athlete, not wearing a white lab coat and have a stethoscope around your neck, right? To be able to talk and understand the needs of an athlete, right? Not be the physical therapist that is trying to prevent them from playing for fear of getting injured or re-injured, but actually helping them get back on the field, stuff like that. There's a ton of commonalities. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think, Mike, you said it really well right there, but there's a lot of commonalities between different buckets of sports, right? There are field-based sports, there's court-based sports, there's rotational-based sports, right? But the difference, there's swimming. Lenny treats swimmers. There's, if you think about it, there's a ton of commonality between baseball pitchers, tennis players, volleyball servers, quarterbacks, right? Those are all rotational sport athletes that, use one of their extremities. So even if you don't know each one of those, you should be able to kind of jive a little bit with that. Field-based sports, okay, you don't understand soccer, rugby, football, those types of things, but look, you understand field-based sports enough, that's very similar. There's running, there's cutting, there's jumping, there's agility, there's change of direction type things, deceleration, right? You'll be able to put all those things together. So I think you just got to take a step back and don't get intimidated by the fact that you don't understand football, for example, right? And just understand that you do get athletes and you do get the different types of athletes, and I think you can do a good job. But take each person as an opportunity now to then go home and you get a golfer for the first time, but you've been working with hockey players and baseball batters for a while, right? So a lot of that's going to carry over, but go home and start studying up on golf. And what are the subtle differences in the biomechanics of golf compared to a hockey swing or a tennis serve or a baseball swing, those types of things. Put that together to slowly grow. But I guess my point or what I wanted to get at is there's probably more commonality than you think, right? So Dan, did I miss anything?
No, I think you did a pretty good job. To piggyback off the whole go home and learn some stuff, you can pretty easily do some research beforehand. Definitely done that. I had someone from Boston Ballet come in recently. I don't know anything about ballet. I don't know what a plie was. But I went home and just did a little bit of research, maybe 30 minutes to an hour, I learned all about the different injuries, first and foremost, that you see, which is all the stuff we already knew about. It's
Right.
just it's very specific to their sport because of the demands. Then learned a lot about the different positions and what tends to happen when people break down, and some basic ideas, some rehab parameters, and some ideas what to be on the lookout for. And when I drop a word, they're like, "Ooh, okay, I didn't know what you're talking about." I'm like, not
Just drop
really.
the plie.
Can you show
Yeah.
us a plie? Like, what do you mean by, I don't understand what a plie
I think
is.
I'm probably getting this wrong. I think it's like this guy coming down.
Yeah.
I don't know if the heels stay down or
Can't be it.
kind of pop up. There's a great plie. I'm not very good at ballet, guys. I'm sorry. I'm probably getting this killed. The second point I was going to make is I think communication is really important.
Yeah.
And part of
Good
this is
point.
like, yeah, if you have someone who comes in and you don't understand their sport whatsoever, if you're sitting there just trying to drop a whole bunch of words that you think make sense to that person, the person's going to see right through you. And it's important, I think, to just be honest that you may not know this sport very well, but also have a plan to say, look, I don't understand swimming as well as Lenny does because he works with so many swimming athletes, but I'm definitely going to talk to your coach. I'm going to do some research online afterwards. This is the plan based on what I know and my experience. I'm going to make sure that we have, let's say your coach looking on you and make sure your technique is good. Let's make sure we communicate because I know we need to unload this shoulder because you have this, labral tear, whatever it is. And then you have other people in your team that maybe make up for those knowledge gaps that you don't have. So
Yeah, it's great. And then, and you know what you just defined? That's sports medicine, right? Notice it's not, I'm not saying sports physical therapy, that's sports medicine, meaning we've got to work together. You got to work with the coaches, you got to work with the strength coaches and the athletic trainers and the sport coaches to all understand these different things. So you can talk to like the athletic trainer for that team and say, all right, what does Johnny need to get back to for his sport? Okay, let me get him the first half of that, and then you take him from there, and they can get him back onto the field from there. Those types of things. It's about collaborating as a team. So
I think one thing, just to maybe end it sounds like, but I think one thing to kind of understand is that the sports, they're very different, but back in the 90s or 2000s, we were trying to be functional in our rehab, and everything had to look like the sport. Like, if you're treating a golfer, you had to do like golf-specific type strengthening exercises and all that. But yeah, exactly, Tommy Boy type exercises. But I think if you get your base of general strength, and then you get a little bit more power and strength and endurance, and then the very end is when you get a little bit more specific in that sport, meaning football, whatever. So I think if you get that base of, they're probably not doing any rotator cuff exercises, most likely if they swim. They just focus on swimming, right? Or education on the volume of stuff that they're doing. It's usually an overuse injury, right? Depending on the sport, but it's acute versus a kind of a chronic injury. So I think if you educate on maybe decreasing their volume and giving them some basic stuff, you immediately get buy-in, and then you start chatting away with them about their sport specifically in a few more visits. I think you win them from the get-go, and then
you're learning.
And you're learning as you go. You're chatting it
You're
up.
learning.
You're doing exercise with them, but you got to get that base in everybody, and they're probably not doing that anyway. So
Yeah, and
it's a win-win.
And I'm not to keep going, but like when you do finally get a sport, either you're working with a ton of those people or you're starting to learn it more, your buy-in from the people does get better. You're right.
Yeah.
You said that, right? For me to say like, oh, your shoulder hurts when you're trying to get down and away to a righty, or with your, you know what I mean? Like you got to know that, and you're not going to know that unless you hang out with that sport, right? So I know a lot about baseball because like I would be in a bullpen with guys working on baseball, not working on rehab, right? And learning what they're thinking, what the coach is saying to them, those sorts of things. So if you want to get really good at a sport, spend some time with that sport and volunteer and be like an assistant to them and help them, and I think that'll help. But don't get, I think you're just intimidated.
Yeah, don't freak out. Just
right?
keep it simple at the beginning anyway, and it'll catch on.
Yeah, absolutely. So awesome. Another great question. We appreciate it. Head to MikeReinold.com, click on that podcast link, and you can keep asking us questions. And yeah, see you on the next episode.